Welcome back to Study Hall, everybody. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Awesome. Today, we're going to be tackling a piece of art that's caused a whole lot of controversy.
Oh, yeah.
More than maybe any other.
Yeah.
We're talking about Piss Christ by Serrano.
Definitely a conversation starter.
Yeah, you can say that again, but don't worry if, like, the last time you're in a museum was on a field trip back in grade school.
Right.
We're going to break it all down. No art degree required.
Promise.
So, Piss Christ.
Ah.
Let me try and, like, paint you a picture with words. You got a crucifix, you know, like the kind you'd probably find in any, like, little gift shop, maybe a gas station off the highway.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's submerged in a jar of the artist's urine.
That's pretty shocking, right?
Yeah. Now, it's actually a Cibachrome print.
Mm-hmm.
So the colors are, surprisingly, really beautiful. Like kind of luminous golds, ambers, you know, almost like those Renaissance paintings with the angels.
Yeah.
All bathed in like heavenly light and stuff. What's your first reaction when you hear that? Like what comes to mind? Because believe it or not, that reaction is exactly what Serrano was going for. He wanted to create art that like punches you in the gut, makes you think twice.
It's all about provoking a reaction.
That's definitely not like your grandma's landscape painting, that's for sure. So to kind of understand, Piss Christ,
Yeah.
we need to understand the artist himself, right? Like, who is this Serrano?
Yeah.
What's his deal?
Well, Serrano's an American photographer, and he's kind of known for pushing boundaries, exploring themes that, well, can be a bit controversial.
He likes to make people squirm.
A little bit. He often uses, like, bodily fluids in his work.
Like what?
Blood, milk, you name it.
Oh, wow. Okay, I can see where the controversy comes in.
Yeah. But to understand why he uses these materials, we got to go back to his background. He was raised Catholic.
Okay.
And that upbringing had a massive influence on his art, especially this fascination with religious imagery.
So it's not just like shock value for the sake of shock value. There's like a deeper connection there.
Yeah, definitely.
A dialogue with his own, you know, religious background.
Exactly.
Okay, so knowing that, how did people react when Piss Christ like first came out? I'm guessing it wasn't all like standing ovations and rave reviews.
Oh, it was a firestorm. Absolutely a firestorm. Accusations of blasphemy, protests outside galleries. People even tried to attack the artwork.
Wow.
We're talking the late 1980s here. And this was a time of intense, like, culture wars in the U.S.
Oh, yeah.
There were huge debates about, you know, what kind of art the government should be funding.
Right.
And you had these conservative groups pushing back against anything that they considered offensive. And Piss Christ, I mean, it landed right in the middle of that.
Like a bomb.
Yeah, pretty much.
So this one piece of art became a symbol for artistic freedom, but it also sparked this huge backlash.
Right. It's kind of ironic, right?
Yeah, big time. It's like almost shut down the conversation about it entirely.
Exactly. Art can be a double-edged sword. It can, you know, be a tool for liberation, but also trigger all these deep-seated fears and anxieties.
And Piss Christ just kind of hit all those buttons.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So we've established it's controversial. But what is it actually about? What's Serrano trying to say?
Right.
I mean, is it just to shock people? Or is there more to it?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting. See, Serrano has never actually explained his true intention. And that ambiguity, that's part of its power, right?
Okay.
It forces us, the viewers, to come up with our own interpretations.
So it's like up to us to figure it out.
Exactly. But that doesn't mean it's just a free-for-all. Critics and scholars have identified, like, several layers of meaning that we can explore.
Okay. I am all ears.
Yeah.
Let's get into it.
All right. One interpretation is that it's like a critique of how we commercialize religion.
Okay.
You know, he uses this like cheap, mass-produced crucifix. It's something you'd find at a truck stop gift shop, and submerges it in urine. It's almost like he's saying, you know, we've turned these religious symbols into just commodities,
Right.
stripping them of their meaning, their power.
So it's less about disrespecting Christ and more about how we've kind of diluted faith in this world, obsessed with, you know, buying and selling.
Yeah, exactly. Another interpretation focuses on suffering.
Okay.
So the crucifix, even though it's like submerged in urine, it still represents, you know, Christ's sacrifice. And the golden hues, that Cibachrome print that we talked about, you know, he deliberately chose that process to get this luminosity.
Right.
And it almost evokes, like, you know, this classic paintings of the Passion of Christ. It's like he's saying, even in degradation, that essence of faith, of sacrifice, it can endure.
So there's like way more to it than just trying to shock people.
Oh, absolutely. There are so many layers here. And then there's the idea that he's trying to challenge our squeamishness about bodily fluids.
Yeah.
Like, why are certain things considered sacred and others profane?
It's true. It's like we all have them. Bodily fluids, it's natural.
Right.
But we've built up all these weird hang-ups, taboos around 'em.
Exactly. Like, we can look at a classical nude sculpture and be like, oh, heart. But show us, like, blood or urine, and suddenly it's like, scandalous.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. It makes you think about, who decides those things.
Exactly. So out of all of those, which interpretation kind of resonates most with you?
It's interesting because, like, it doesn't have to be just one. Right? I mean, it can be about the commercialization and the suffering and also our own, like, hang-ups about the body all at once.
Absolutely. They're not mutually exclusive.
Yeah. It's like peeling back layers of an onion.
That's a great analogy. And this actually leads into another important aspect of understanding Piss Christ. We got to look at the context. Where does this fit in the art world?
Yeah, fill me in. Because I'm starting to see how this is way more than just, like, some guy trying to be edgy.
Right.
Like, it's making us think about some pretty big ideas. But how does it fit into the whole art history timeline?
Okay. So Serrano's work, especially Piss Christ, really falls under the umbrella of postmodernism.
Postmodernism.
Yeah, this movement that, gained traction in the latter half of the 20th century. It was all about challenging the rules, like the traditional assumptions about what art should be.
Okay. So they were like the rebels of the art world.
Pretty much, yeah. Questioning the norms, poking fun at the old ways. And they started, incorporating these everyday materials into their art. Like you think about Andy Warhol's soup cans or Duchamp's ready-made.
Oh, right. Okay, so Piss Christ wasn't just some random, like, act of rebellion.
No, it was part of this, bigger conversation that had already started about how art can challenge the way we see the world.
That's interesting.
And to really understand how radical that was, you got to remember, throughout history, artists have used religious subjects in unconventional ways.
Yeah.
And it hasn't always gone over well.
Right.
Think about Michelangelo's David. I mean, that was pretty edgy for its time. A nude sculpture of a biblical hero.
Yeah, I guess that was pretty out there for back then.
Right. It's like artists have always been pushing the boundaries, and sometimes society catches up, and sometimes it pushes back.
Yeah, it's a constant push and pull.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Piss Christ, it's part of this long line of artists who are, daring to challenge the status quo and using art to explore these difficult, uncomfortable themes. It's a continuation of this conversation about the power of images, the role of religion, and the limits of artistic freedom.
So even though it feels shocking and new, in a way, it's actually building on this long tradition.
Exactly. It's got deep roots.
Wow, that is fascinating.
Yeah.
So going back to something you said earlier about Serrano's deliberate ambiguity with the meaning of the piece.
Yeah.
How did the art world itself respond to Piss Christ? Did they embrace it or did they condemn it?
Well, the art world is never really one big happy family.
Fair enough.
There were some critics who really praised Piss Christ. They loved its boldness, the conceptual depth. They saw it as this powerful statement, a critique of, like, the commodification of religion and the hypocrisy of, those who were so quick to condemn it.
So they saw past the shock value and got to, like, the deeper message.
Exactly. They saw the commentary on, our values as a society. But then you had other critics who dismissed it completely. They thought it was just a chip stunt, an attention grab, like he was just trying to be offensive.
I guess you can't win them all.
Right. Especially when you're pushing the envelope like that.
Yeah. It's like people were so focused on whether it was good or bad, they kind of forgot to actually look at it and think about, what it meant.
Right, they got caught up in the controversy. But even amidst all that, some scholars pointed out some interesting parallels between Piss Christ and more traditional religious art.
Oh, really?
Yeah, remember we talked about Serrano's Catholic upbringing? Well, some art historians argued that the way Piss Christ is composed visually, like the crucifix bathed in that golden light, it actually kind of echoes the aesthetic of Renaissance and Baroque religious painting.
Wow. So even though he's using these unconventional materials, there's still this sense of, like, reverence.
Yeah. this connection to art history.
Wow, that's really interesting.
Yeah, and some even went as far as to say that the urine itself, while shocking at first glance,
Yeah.
could actually be interpreted as a symbol of cleansing or purification.
Interesting.
Bodily fluids have been used in religious rituals throughout history.
Right.
It's all about challenging our preconceived notions, And that's what makes Piss Christ so fascinating. It doesn't fit neatly into any box. It forces us to confront our own biases, our own assumptions.
So how do we even begin to assess the legacy of this piece? I mean, it's been, what, like over 30 years since it was first shown? And people are still, freaking out about it. What kind of impact has it had on the art world, on how we understand what art can be?
Well, one way to look at its legacy is to see how it's influenced other artists.
Yeah.
The ones that came after. Piss Christ kind of helped open up the space for more challenging, more provocative art. Art that deals with taboo, art that isn't afraid to, push buttons.
So it's not just about the piece itself, but about the doors it opened for others to explore different themes, different ways of making art.
Absolutely. It also forced this bigger conversation about the role of art in society and the limits of artistic freedom. Should art provoke? Should it comfort? Should it be funded by the government? These are questions we're still asking today.
Yeah.
And Piss Christ helped to bring those questions to the surface.
It's like it became this lightning rod for this huge cultural dialogue about censorship, free expression, art, religion.
Exactly. And another way to think about its legacy is to look at how people are responding to it today. It's still being shown in museums all over the world. And it still has the power to, shock, intrigue, spark debate.
People are still talking about it.
Oh, yeah, big time.
It hasn't lost its edge.
Not one.
People are still, viscerally reacting to it.
Absolutely. And I think that really speaks to its power as a work of art.
Yeah.
It's a piece that makes us confront our own beliefs, our own biases, our own assumptions about art, about religion, even about life itself.
Okay, so I know we've been talking a lot about the big ideas, the controversy, but I'm also kind of curious about the more technical side of Piss Christ. We mentioned earlier that it's a Cibachrome print.
Right.
Can you tell us a bit more about that? What's so special about that process, and why would Serrano choose it for this piece?
Yeah, so Cibachrome was a photographic printing process that was, pretty popular in the late 20th century. It's known for, super vibrant colors, a really high level of detail, and Serrano chose it for Piss Christ for a couple of reasons. The first was to really emphasize that luminosity of the image. Remember, he's trying to create the sense of the sacred, even though he's using, materials that are typically considered profane.
So, even the printing process itself plays a role in conveying his artistic vision.
Absolutely. Those vibrant colors, that kind of glowing quality you get with the Cibachrome, it all contributes to this unsettling beauty that characterizes the piece. And the second reason he chose Cibachrome was because it's a really durable process. The colors don't fade as quickly, which means that the image is going to retain its impact, for a long time.
That's really interesting. So he wasn't just thinking about the immediate reaction to the piece.
Yeah.
But also how it would hold up over time.
Exactly. And I think that kind of shows his seriousness as an artist. He wasn't just trying to, create some fleeting sensation.
Right.
He wanted to make something that would last.
And boy, did it last.
Yeah.
I mean, Piss Christ, it's got to be one of the most talked about, most debated pieces of art in recent history.
Oh, absolutely. It really speaks to the power of art, to challenge us, to make us think, even when it makes us uncomfortable.
Okay, well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today.
Yeah, we have.
From that initial shock of seeing Piss Christ to those deeper layers of meaning to its lasting impact on the art world. But before we wrap up, I want to touch on one more thing.
Okay.
We talked about how the critics responded, the art world. But what about everyday people? How did, the general public react to this?
It was a mixed bag for sure. Some people were outraged, some were curious, some were just completely confused.
Yeah, it's one thing to look at a landscape or a portrait.
Yeah.
But when you're faced with something like Piss Christ, it's so conceptual, so challenging. You have to engage with it on a whole other level.
Absolutely. And it really pushed people's buttons. It made them confront their own ideas about art, about religion, about what you're even allowed to talk about in public. It became a real flashpoint.
Yeah.
Sparked all these debates about, censorship, funding for the arts, even like what art even is.
So it wasn't just an art world controversy. It really blew up into this much bigger conversation.
Right.
About free speech, the role of religion,
Right.
the power of images to get a reaction.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so important, I think, even all these years later. It's a reminder that art can be a powerful tool for change,
Yeah.
even if that change is uncomfortable.
And it's a change that's still happening.
Absolutely. It's not over.
Piss Christ is still pushing us to question things,
Mm-hmm.
challenge our assumptions
Yeah, and make us face some hard truths.
about ourselves and the world we live in.
It's a powerful piece.
So for our listeners who might be feeling, I don't know, overwhelmed, maybe even a little confused
Yeah.
by Piss Christ, I think the main thing to remember here is that there's no right or wrong answer.
Mm-hmm.
It's designed to make you think, to start a conversation. And ultimately, like, what it means is up to each person to decide.
I completely agree. It's all about, how you experience it, what it sparks in you.
Yeah, and I know some of you might be thinking, okay, I get it. It's controversial. It makes you think. But do I have to like it?
Right.
And the answer is, of course not.
No.
Art is subjective. You're allowed to have your own taste.
Absolutely. You don't have to love it. You don't
Yeah.
have to hate it.
Mm.
The important thing is that you engage with it. You think about it. And you come to your own conclusions.
Yeah, well said. Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into Piss Christ. Thanks for sticking with us on this wild ride.
Yeah, it's been really interesting to kind of dig into all this.
So after spending all this time with Piss Christ, like, what are your final thoughts? Did anything we talked about change your perspective on it at all?
It's funny because what really strikes me now is how Piss Christ, it's almost like a Rorschach test,
Yeah.
Like whatever you think about it, whether you love it, you hate it, or you're just totally confused, it says a lot about you, about what you believe, where your comfort zones are, how you deal with ideas that challenge you.
That's so true. It's not just about the art itself. It's about what that art brings out in us.
Exactly. And that's why it's still so relevant, right? Even after all these
Yeah.
years, it's not just some old piece, sitting in a museum.
Yeah.
It's a catalyst for these conversations about art, religion, freedom, all that messy stuff we deal with as humans.
It's definitely made me think a lot harder about all the images I see every day.
Yeah.
Not just, in a gallery or whatever,
Right.
but like everywhere. Ads, social media, even just the logos on my clothes.
Yeah.
Piss Christ is like, oh, wake up call,
Mhm.
To really pay attention, question your assumptions,
Totally.
like look for those hidden meanings because they're everywhere.
Especially in a world where we're bombarded with images constantly.
Yeah.
It's easy to just passively consume it all. But Piss Christ, it's like it shakes you and says, hey, look closer. Think about what you're seeing.
Don't just take it at face value.
Exactly.
So if our listeners could walk away from this with just one golden nugget of wisdom, what would it be?
I think it would be this. Art is meant to challenge us, make us think, even if it makes us a little uncomfortable.
Right.
And that's a good thing. Actually, that's when art is at its best. So the next time you see something that triggers you, good, bad, whatever, lean into it, figure out why it's making you feel that way, see where it takes you.
I love that. Embrace the discomfort.
Yeah.
Well, if you're curious to see Piss Christ for yourself, look it up online. Maybe see if a museum near you has it on display.
Yeah, it's an experience for sure.
It'll definitely get you thinking. And let us know what you think. We always love to hear your take.
Yeah. How does it speak to you?
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Piss Christ, everybody. We'll catch you next time on Study Hall.